right, U.S. History, it's Mr. Cotter. We're going to go through Vietnam notes online here. So I've recorded these. You should have a Google Doc in Schoology that has basically guided notes for you on this. Those notes need to be taken through from this video, and then once those notes are completed, you will submit those through Schoology, just to make sure I know that everybody's gotten those pieces of information and that kind of stuff. So today we're going to talk Vietnam and kind of how this went through. This won't be an incredibly long video or anything like that, but I just want to make sure we hit on as many of the highlight points as we can through here. So first thing to talk about is France. France ruled Vietnam as a colony from the late 1800s all the way up to World War II. So during World War II, the Japanese took over Vietnam and kind of pushed the French out during that time. So a communist party formed in the 1930s, which was led by this man right here, Ho Chi Minh, leader of communists in Vietnam. Basically, he created this to fight the French and the Japanese to get them out of Vietnam. Ultimately, Ho Chi Minh, after World War II, wants and does declare Vietnam independent. Okay, so but once World War II is over, the French want to return and reclaim Vietnam as their own since they were pushed out before. The U.S. began to give money to France to help stop the spread of communism, and they wanted France to take back over Vietnam. But just like anything else, the United States wants communism to stop spreading. So you get this another term called domino theory. Okay, if one nation falls to communism, nearby nations will also fall to it. Now we've talked about this at length during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, all that kind of stuff. Basically, containment, wanting to stop communism. This is just another word for containment, or another word for what happens if communism does spread. So, even with US aid, the French, while trying to get back into Vietnam after World War II, end up getting defeated by the Vietnamese at a battle called Dien Bien Phu in 1954. And the French were forced out of Vietnam at this time. So, after France left, countries came together to work out peace agreements, and this meeting was known as the Geneva Accords. Okay, so a couple things they would do here. Vietnam would be divided at the 17th parallel. Okay, you can kind of see right here. You see kind of like a demilitarized zone, that kind of stuff. That'd be roughly right about where the 17th parallel is. And the two countries, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, get broken up. Okay, North, communist led by Ho Chi Minh. The South, anti-communist, led by Ngo Dinh Diem. Okay, so Ngo Dinh Diem was a cruel and oppressive leader to the South Vietnamese people. Okay, he was Catholic. A large portion of the country were Buddhist. He persecuted the Buddhists, so Buddhist monks in protest in the streets by burning themselves, as you can see in this picture here. The U.S. was to support a coup to remove him, even though we helped get him in power. We helped get him in power going, oh, he's going to be good. He's going to keep communism from spreading. But in turn, he becomes so oppressive that we now help to get him out of there. Okay, so JFK didn't want to look soft on communism, so Kennedy increases aid and sends advisors to Vietnam to help train South Vietnamese soldiers. So you get two types of soldiers in Vietnam. Okay, you get the Viet Cong, okay, which are also known as VC, communist in the South. So basically, south of the 17th parallel. They end up killing thousands of the South's government officials. These were hardened soldiers at this time. Okay. The other type of soldiers, you get the NVA, or the North Vietnamese Army, trained soldiers of North Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh begins sending supplies to the south to aid the Viet Cong through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which you can see in this picture here. You see the 17th parallel, that demilitarized zone, and then you have the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to help aid those Viet Cong soldiers to get them supplies and that kind of stuff. So I'm sure you've heard of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and that kind of stuff throughout history and there. So the conflict begins to expand. You get Lyndon Johnson, okay, who's now president. It takes over his presidency after Kennedy's assassination. On August 4th, 1964, the USS Maddox is fired upon by a North Vietnamese boat. Okay, so the USS Maddox gets torpedoed. The U.S. fired back, and the next day bombs North Vietnam. Okay, so we get this thing called the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. Okay, it was not a declaration of war, but it gave President Johnson broad military powers. Okay, very broad military powers. February of 1965, he sends about 50,000 U.S. troops to Vietnam. All right. Next, you get this man right here, William Westmoreland, who becomes the leader of the U.S. troops in Vietnam. Uh, Basically, he stated the U.S. would defeat the Viet Cong in North VA because they couldn't win without our help. So Westmoreland thinks if we aren't helping the Vietnamese soldiers, they can't beat us. Okay, so in the beginning of the war, U.S. public support for Lyndon Johnson and his fight against communism was pretty high support. Okay, Johnson stated, he was not about to send American boys 9 or 10,000 miles away from home to do what Asian boys ought to be doing for themselves. So later on, he's going to end up sending people, and we're going to get into those pieces. Okay, so by 1965, 180,000 Americans were in Vietnam. By 1967, we had almost 500,000 troops in Vietnam. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the fighting in Vietnam and kind of the things that went on. So this is going to be a big war in the jungle. Okay, so there are 4 big pieces to this. Okay, first thing you're going to see right here are tunnel systems. Okay, so the tunnel systems during this time are what really get the Vietnamese around. Okay, I'm talking deep into the ground. They were able to do communications and sleep, and they were able to get meals, that kind of stuff, and pop in and out from places to attack the U.S. So you can see pictures of the tunnel systems. We had to send people into these tunnels and that kind of stuff to fight Vietnamese soldiers. You can see pictures here of them. In other words, we're tunnel rats, so you can see them crawling through there and that kind of stuff. Almost not large enough for more than one person at a time. Okay. Other pieces that were going on through here, booby traps were a big piece of Vietnamese warfare. So you can see how, right here, they'd put ammunition shells in the ground, almost kind of like landmines. They'd use things called punji pits, where they would basically dig holes and put sticks and all that kind of stuff in there to try to get a hold of people. So this war would be known as a war of attrition. Okay, wearing down the enemy by killing as many soldiers as possible, bringing up the body count with continued harassment. Okay, we just wanted to harass them and harass until hopefully they would try to quit. Okay, we used other things, bombings. You can see a picture here of a B-52 bomber. We wanted to win the hearts and the minds of the local Vietnamese, but other problems occur. Okay, things that were used, napalm. Okay, basically napalm is a mixture of like gasoline and sawdust, and when it hits the ground, it spreads and it just goes and basically incinerates anything that it hits. Okay. Other things that were used, we had search and destroy missions, or these were also called Zippo raids. Agent Orange, all this other stuff gets used. Okay, so but the problem with this is, as this goes on, morale and all this type of stuff begin to drop. Okay, other things that were used during this, helicopters. We talked about helicopters in the Korean War, but mostly just for med flights. Helicopters now are what they call the new cavalry. Okay, we're riding in on helicopters to start all this stuff, but it just kind of continues to wear on and wear on. Okay, so Vietnam was the first televised war. Okay, people saw it firsthand, what it was all about. Reporters were in the field with soldiers, and as the war drug on, public support began to drop. Okay, so you get the word grunts. Okay, nickname of American soldiers fighting and that kind of stuff in the war. Middle class, upper class families had money to send children to college to avoid the draft, which we'll talk a little bit more here in a few about more. Okay, so 80% of soldiers fighting in Vietnam were from lower income families, and the average age of those soldiers was about 19 years old. Okay. So, 1960, over turmoil within the government, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara resigns. Okay, this is important. He was one of Kennedy's trusted advisors. He just didn't like the way the war was going and decided to get out before his name was going to be put onto it anymore. Okay, so next thing that comes in is the draft. Okay, or the lottery. Okay, each day of the year was placed in a bowl and then drew days out to determine who gets drafted. Okay. So 1969 draft, they got to 100 and number 196, so basically 119th day of the year. Okay. So there was a few ways to get out of the draft. Okay. First one here was physical. Okay, you had flat feet, bad back, blown knees, whatever it might have been. You could have got yourself out of there. Okay. The next was mental. Okay, acted crazy. The other piece of it was being homosexual could get you a moral exit from it, and anything like that. So talking about those type of ways. Next piece, conscientious objectors. Okay, at the time, Muhammad Ali, the world champion boxer, was stripped of his title because he said he was a conscientious objector and would not go to fight. Okay, other people went to Canada. Okay, so between 1967 and 1970, 4,000 people were sent to jail for draft dodging. Okay, about another 250,000 were charged for draft dodging. Okay, but about 4,000 actually went to jail for draft dodging during that time. Okay, all right. Next, one of the most famous and major battles during the Vietnam War was the Tet Offensive. Okay, so January 30th, 1968, this would be Vietnam's Lunar New Year. Okay, Lunar New Year. So the U.S. and North Vietnam signed a week-long truce to celebrate the New Year. Okay, so during this, we think we're in a ceasefire. Nothing's going to happen. The night of the Lunar New Year, the Viet Cong surprise attack over 100 cities and 12 U.S. bases all at once. And this attack goes on for a little over a month. Okay, this was a psychological defeat for the U.S. Okay, and this would be Lyndon Johnson's downfall. But the other piece of this is that the Viet Cong would never recover from this. So when this battle was over, 32,000 Viet Cong were killed. Okay, in comparison, only 3,000 U.S. and North Vietnamese were killed during this. So comparatively speaking, we had 3,000 deaths. The enemy had 32,000 deaths. Okay, crushing defeat for the VC. Psychologically, it was a victory for the enemy. The U.S. population then begins to turn on President Johnson after the Tet Offensive. Okay, American people realized that this would be difficult to win this war, and Lyndon Johnson basically announces he won't run for re-election in 1968. So, in 1968, Richard Nixon wins the election, and will win with the promise of getting us out of the war. Okay, so basically that's Nixon's promise. We're gonna get out of the Vietnam War. Okay, some other counterculture type things that take place during Vietnam. You get Woodstock. Okay, music festival in upstate New York. It was like a 4-day long just music festival of peace and love and against war and that kind of stuff. And then you get a few other pieces here. People would let doves go, and that'd be opposing the war. People would use the symbol for hawks as in favor of the war. Okay, so Nixon announces that he's going to start pulling troops out and begins this plan called Vietnamization. Okay, slow withdrawal of troops out of Vietnam. Okay, Nixon wanted the U.S. to save face, so he called his plan "Peace with Honor." Okay, some said his plan kept us in the war for several more years. Okay. The last U.S. troop to leave Vietnam was in March 29th, 1973. So almost about 5 years after he was elected. Okay. So other things that happened, we had the Kent State shootings at May 4th, 1970. burning the ROTC building, which this just happened, was the 50th which I think is the 50th anniversary coming up soon. Um, so these are all counterculture things that are taking place. National Guard gets ordered up there. You can see some of the pictures of what was going on during the Kent State shootings. This was a very tumultuous time during U.S. history. You can see pictures here. So there's 4 students killed in the Kent State shootings. So Vietnam War ends in 1975. Okay, and then the last piece of this here is the Wars Power Act. Okay, troops can be sent to a place for 90 days. All right, so we can get troops on the ground for 90 days. If we don't have an act of war, a declaration of war by Congress within that time, we have to remove the troops. So prior to this in Vietnam, we never declared war. So we have to understand that we never declared war, and that President Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, we had troops there, and this really expanded the president's powers on what they could do. So this Wars Power Act kind of curbs what they can do when they're trying to send troops into different places, different countries, and that kind of stuff. Okay. So that's the end of those notes. All right. What I need you to do for these is go back through. This will be on Schoology, and these notes are going to be due later this week, and we'll keep adding to it. So if you have any questions, need anything, or don't understand anything, please let me know. Email me. All right. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you guys soon. Have a great one.